Jinhu knew it for certain. His watch had stopped at the moment of impact. He moved his fingers. His watch. Seems to work. He slowly sat up. His head was buzzing as if someone inside was rearranging furniture. His left palm was covered in blood, a cut from glass, shallow but long. His shirt was torn. Both sneakers were intact. For some reason, this last thing pleased him most of all. He looked around. There was wreckage around him. Fragments of the fuselage, twisted seats, scraps of belts. A piece of a window stuck vertically in the ground like an absurd monument. Farther away, about 20 meters off, the tail section was smoking. It smelled of kerosene, burnt plastic, and something sweetly rotten, a smell Jinhu could not identify, but one that immediately made his stomach tighten. The forest stood around him like a dense dark green wall. And at that very moment, something clicked in his head. He slowly stood up and turned 360 degrees. Cliffs to the north, the shape of the shoreline, the angle at which the light fell, the smell, the density of the trees. "No," he said quietly out loud. Then a pause. "No, no, no." Then even quieter. Or yes? Because he knew this place. Not because he had been here, but because he had spent a total of more than 800 hours in it. This was an island. Not just an island. That island. Green. Wild. Full of darkness beneath the tree crowns. Inhabited by hunters with spears and torches who did not consider strangers guests. Pierced with underground tunnels, bunkers, ruins, and secrets most players never found because they did not dig deep enough. Jinhu almost laughed. Then he did not laugh because he remembered one detail. Here they kill for real. The first survival skill is not panic and not strategy. The first survival skill is inventory. Jinhu knew this not from instinct, but from thousands of replayed game sessions. Before running, before building, before even thinking about the next step, look at what you have. He walked around the perimeter of the wreckage methodically, as if he were following a cursor on a screen. Shirt pockets, phone, cracked screen, no network, no GPS but still working. Charge 61%, a crumpled boarding pass, chewing gum in a pack, a 501 coin. Lower pants pockets, house keychain, folding knife, small tourist-style blade about 7 centimeters. Jinhu froze for a second, then shoved it into his right pocket, closer to his hand. A shoulder bag somehow miraculously intact and stuck under a seat. Inside, a 500 milliliter bottle of water, full, 2 chocolate bars, a charging cable, a notebook, 2 pens, headphones. All of it was crumpled and partly wet but intact. Now the wreckage. He spent 20 minutes before he found what he was looking for, the tail section. That was always where the most useful things were. Not in the sense of game logic, but in the sense of real aviation layout. The tail contained the luggage compartment, emergency kits, sometimes a hatchet for emergencies. Jinhu found the hatchet almost immediately. It was fixed to a bracket inside the wall of the right side. The red plastic cover was cracked, but the blade was intact. Small, short, with a pole. Not a lumberjack's tool, more like a household one. But it was a metal blade and it could chop. Jinhu took it in his hands and felt something shift in his chest. Not fear, something like grounding, as if this weight in his hand said, everything begins here. Additionally, from the wreckage he managed to extract, emergency kit, 3 splints, 5 bandages, 8 water purification tablets, a small flashlight with batteries, 3 passenger blankets made of synthetic fabric, wrinkled but intact, 2 metal trays from the service cart, a piece of strong nylon cord, about 8 meters, an empty steel thermos mug, several sheets of foil from the kitchen block. He laid everything out on the ground and looked at it for about 30 seconds. "All right," he said out loud, just to hear a human voice. "We work. The first rule of the island? Do not stay near the wreckage for long." The Aborigines Jinhu forced himself by sheer will not to say the game word cannibals, although that was the very word that first came to mind, found new points quickly. In the game, it was about 15 in-game minutes. Here, who knew? But it was not worth risking. He packed everything that fit into the bag, wrapped the rest in a blanket, tied it with the cord. It turned into an awkward, heavy bundle, which he slung over his shoulder as a second layer on top of the bag. He took the hatchet in his right hand, then stopped, thought, and looked at the sky. The sun was high enough, which meant about 3 hours of daylight, maybe a little more. That was enough for exactly one thing, to find a place for a temporary camp before dark. In the game, the first base was always built at the foot of a large rock with an overhanging ledge. Not because it was beautiful, but because the ledge gave one protected sector from the north. No need to put up a wall. Saving materials. The northern rock. about 800 meters through the forest. The problem was that the forest here was not a park. It was a real primeval forest, dense, damp, alive, and completely hostile. The trees stood so close that between some trunks one could barely squeeze through sideways. Roots came out to the surface and intertwined like fingers. Underfoot lay a thick layer of leaves, rotten branches, and moss, which sprang back but hid uneven ground. Jinhu walked slowly, listened. The island was never silent. He remembered that well. Birds, insects, wind in the upper tier of the crowns, all of it created continuous background noise. But this noise had structure, and when something went wrong, the structure changed. He walked about 200 meters before he felt it for the first time. Silence. Not complete, but the nearest strip, about 30 meters to the right, suddenly lost the sound of birds. Jinhu did not stop. He slightly changed his trajectory, moving left, behind a large mossy boulder. He crouched behind it and waited 30 seconds. Nothing. Then a quiet sound, something crunched. He pressed himself against the stone and did not breathe. Silence again. Then a crunch again. 1, 2, 3. Rhythmic but careless, that is how something walks when it is not afraid of being heard. Jinhu slowly peeked out from behind the stone. He saw it for a fraction of a second, a silhouette between the trees. Tall, hunched, with something long in its hand. It was moving toward the plane wreckage. Jinhu watched it go and held his breath. 1. For now. 1. He waited another minute. Then quietly, very quietly, he moved on, keeping farther west of the chosen route. His hands were not shaking. This surprised him a little. Then he remembered that he had done exactly this many times, only while looking at a monitor and gripping a mouse. Maybe muscle memory works not only for the body. He reached the northern rock while it was still light, about an hour before dark. The rock was exactly as he remembered it, a tall gray-brown mass tilted at a slight angle. On one side at the foot there was a wide ledge, almost 2 meters deep and about 4 wide. Dry protection on 3 sides. A view forward. Jinhu stood by the ledge, put the load on the ground, and took several slow breaths. Good, he said quietly. We begin. First, the perimeter. He walked around the nearest 50 meters, marking entrances, exits, large trees that would provide material, the density of the bushes. He found a small stream 15 meters to the west, narrow but alive. The water was clear, the bottom visible, then a tree. He chose the first one of medium diameter without obvious signs of rot. He took the hatchet in both hands, took aim, and struck. The tree did not respond instantly. The hatchet was small, the blade not especially sharp. The first blow stripped the bark more than they chopped. But Jinhu did not get angry. He simply worked methodically, choosing the angle, applying force evenly. On the 8th blow, real chips appeared. On the 23rd, the tree trembled. On the 31st, it fell. Jinhu stood over it and breathed heavily. His palms were burning. His left shoulder ached from the unfamiliar strain. He looked at the cut on his hand. The bandage was slightly soaked with sweat. Good, he said again. 2 more. The next 2 trees were easier. He had already understood the rhythm, the angle of the blow. By the end of the 3rd, his hands almost no longer obeyed from fatigue, but he had 3 logs about 2.5 meters long and several thicker branches. Now construction. Before dark, he managed to place 3 vertical support logs in front of the entrance to the ledge, tie them with the cord, and throw horizontal branches on top. What came out was not a wall, a lattice. It would not stop an adult man, but it would slow him down. And it would also make noise if someone tried to break through it, he would hear. Between 2 stones by the wall, he laid out a small fire. Whether to light it or not, Jinhu thought for a long time. In the game, the answer was simple. Campfire equals landmark for enemies, especially at night. But in reality, the first night without warmth could cost too much. Damp forest, the night temperature dropped sharply, and he had a wet shirt and a cut hand. He decided small, deep, closed on 3 sides. The fire caught on the 4th attempt. Dry bark, 2 pages from the notebook, a spark from the metal parts of a broken lighter compartment that had been found in the emergency kit. The small orange flame ate the darkness slowly and stubbornly. Jinhu sat beside it, wrapped himself in a blanket, and opened a chocolate bar. He chewed it slowly, very slowly, because it was one of 2 and he did not know when the next food would be. The forest outside was alive. Clear sounds, wind, birds. Somewhere far away, a monotonous drumbeat. Low, rhythmic, like the pulse of a huge creature. Jinhu froze. Drums. That meant the tribe's camp was somewhere to the southeast. About where it should have been if the map was truthful. 1.5 kilometers, maybe 2. Too close. Too far to worry about right now. He lay on his back, looking at the gray stone above his head, and began to think. Position. Rock north, ledge, temporary shelter. Resources, hatchet, knife, cord, emergency kit, water to filter, blankets. Threats, tribe active at night, possibly forest monsters not yet confirmed. Unknown zones. Priorities for tomorrow. Walls, walls, walls. He remembered the map, remembered every point, every cave, every bunker, every abandoned camp. Remembered where useful bushes grew, remembered the paths hunters used, remembered where the traps stood, the ones someone had set many years ago. This knowledge was his main asset, and at the same time the source of constant quiet horror. Because in the game, knowing the map meant you already know what is happening here. But here it meant you know what is happening here. And that is much worse. Tomorrow, he said quietly, closed his eyes. He did not fall asleep right away. The drums did not fall silent. Somewhere far in the forest, a sound rolled once, low, drawn out, unlike either a bird or an animal. Jinhu opened his eyes, lay motionless for 30 seconds, then the sound vanished. He lay and listened for a long time after that. Then he fell asleep, lightly, alertly, like an animal. But he fell asleep. He woke before dawn. Not because something had happened, simply because his body, not yet adapted to the nighttime forest noise, interpreted every minute of silence as preparation for something bad. Jinhu sat up, rubbed his face, checked his hand. The cut had become slightly inflamed at the edges, pink but not hot. He treated it a second time, changed the bandage, drank a little water from the bottle, broke off 1/4 of the second bar strictly according to ration. Then he stepped out from under the ledge and looked at the forest. Morning fog lay in layers between the trees, bluish and dense. The birds had not yet fully begun, only solitary voices here and there. The drums were silent. He did the first thing that had to be done in the morning of any survival, check the perimeter. Everything was in place. His lattice stood untouched. The fire had burned down to coals, good that he had managed to cover it with a flat stone before sleep. No traces of foreign feet, nothing touched. The first night had passed. Now work. Jinhu sketched out a plan for the day in his head. First, expand the wall. 3 logs are nothing. At least 8 are needed plus horizontal crossbars. A double layer. The main wall with 1 entrance, shoulder width wide. Second, the roof. The ledge is good, but wind and rain come from the east. A slanted canopy is needed. Third, traps. At least 1 basic loop from the cord on a suitable trail about 30 meters away. Early warning is better than surprise. Fourth, food. By evening, at least 1 source of protein is needed. Berries, he could identify some of them. In the game, part of them had been marked as edible. A trap for small game would also help. He took the hatchet and went to chop trees. By noon, he had felled 6 more trees. His hands no longer simply hurt. Something like a dull, constant pain had appeared in them. Not sharp, but unending. His palms were covered with the first blisters, and the cut on his left hand began to sting from sweat. But the wall was growing. He worked by the method he knew well from the game. Vertical supports are dug into the ground at an angle to the wall, outward so the enemy cannot lean on them. Horizontal logs are laid into grooves and tied. No nails, there are none, but there are forked branches that hold the crossbars in the grooves, no worse than fasteners. The trick was in the burrs. Several times Jinhu chopped branches off the trunks not at the base, but left 5 to 7 centimeters of sharp, protruding stubs. On a horizontal log, it looked harmless. But if someone tried to climb over quickly, they would get it in the hand or thigh. By the middle of the day, the wall covered the entire entrance to the ledge, 4 meters wide, more than 1 meter 80 high, with a passage 50 centimeters wide and a woven shutter made of branches. Jinhu stepped back and looked at it. "This is something," he said. Then he grimaced because he had said it out loud, and the forest around immediately became somehow too quiet. He took the tools and went inside. He found berries at 3 in the afternoon. Dark blue, dense, on a low bush by the stream. In the game, they were simply called forest berries and gave a small recovery. In reality, Jinhu had no idea what plant this was. But the shape of the leaf, the arrangement of the cluster, and the color matched so exactly that he took the risk. Ate 1. Waited 15 minutes. No burning, nausea, or numbness. Ate 5 more. Waited 20. Then gathered as many as he could into his pocket and went back to the base. Halfway there, he stopped. Smell, not rot and not animal. Something rancid, smoky, with a sharp note as if bone or hide had been burned. To the left, about 40 meters. Jinhu dropped behind the bushes instantly. He did not even think. His body reacted before his brain. Then he carefully peeked out. There were two of them. Not tall, shorter than him by about a head. Dark skin painted with ochre and something white. Narrow faces, long hair braided or twisted into plaits. One had a long wooden spear in his hand with a tip made of stone or bone. The other had two small knives on his belt and something like a shoulder bag, stuffed to the top. They walked without hurry, not hunting, talking. More precisely, exchanging short, sharp sounds, something between hissing and clicking, clearly in their own language. Jinhu did not move. They passed about 20 meters from him and vanished behind the trees, moving southeast. He waited another 3 minutes, then slowly in a wide arc returned to the base. He went inside, closed the woven shutter tightly, sat on the ground by the wall. His hands finally began to tremble slightly. "Good," he said quietly. "So they are here." Then he was silent for a while. Of course they are here, I knew that. Knowing it is one thing, seeing it is another. At night, when the drums began beating again to the southeast, Jinhu sat by the small fire and thought. He had a notebook and a pen. He opened a clean page and wrote one word at the top. Map. Then he began to draw. Not artistically, schematically, the island from above. He remembered its shape by heart, stretched from north to south, with a wide central part and a thin isthmus in the south. About 8 kilometers long, 4 or 5 wide. He marked points. Northern Rock, now here Tribal Camp Southeast, about 1.5 to 2 kilometers second Tribal Camp Western Shore, by the Rocky Cliff Cave in the northwest, empty, good second base gorge center of the island, dangerous zone coastal caves south bunker. He stopped. The bunker. In the game, the bunker was the main place. That was where the keys to the island's secrets were. There was real technology there. There were answers there. It was in the center of the island, under an old ruined researchers' camp. The entrance was hidden under rubble, but if you knew exactly where to dig, it was a matter of several hours of work. Jinhu circled it, then wrote beside it, "Priority, but not now." First, he had to survive. Become invisible, become stronger, accumulate resources. Understand what exactly in this world matched the game and what did not. Because even now he was noticing differences. Fatigue here was real, not a health bar, but a body that hurt. The smell was real. The tribe looked like people, not like models with preset behavior. And the fear was real too. Jinhu slammed the notebook shut. "So," he said quietly, addressing himself, "I have a map, I have a plan, I have a hatchet and 800 hours of experience. And I need to turn this place into a home." He looked at the walls of his base, rough, uneven, made of raw wood. But they stood. "A beginning has been made," he said, and at that moment something outside passed along the wall. Slowly, without hurry, steps, 1, 2, 3. Then a pause, then nothing. Jinhu did not move from his place. He only took the hatchet and very carefully shifted it into his right hand. The silence lasted a long time. Then the drums struck again in the distance, muffled, steady. And again nothing. He sat without moving for another hour, then lay down, not letting the hatchet out of his hand, and closed his eyes. The island breathed. He survived. For now, that was one and the same. On the second day, Jinhu got up before the birds. Not because he had slept enough. He had spent most of the night in the space between sleep and wakefulness, in that strange state when the body rests. But the mind continues working at minimum speed, listening, analyzing, classifying every sound behind the wall. The steps he had heard before sleep did not repeat. But the memory of them remained like a splinter. He treated his hand, ate a third of the bar, drank water, and went out. The morning was gray. The fog lay thicker than yesterday, which meant there had been high humidity during the night. Jinhu sniffed the air. A fresh, slightly rotten smell of wet wood. No smoke, no foreign smells. Good. He returned to the notebook, quickly ran his eyes over the map, and set the first point of the route. The old camp. In the game, it was located about 1.5 kilometers northwest of the rock. Abandoned, partly collapsed, overgrown. But there were things there. In the game, it was called random loot. Something was always found in a different combination. Tools, containers, sometimes weapons. In reality, Jinhu did not know what would be there. But he knew the place existed. He packed the knife, left the main load under the canopy, took the hatchet, and moved northwest. The forest in the morning was different than in the evening. Less threatening, or more precisely, threatening in a different way. Visibility was better, but the fog stole distance. The trees that yesterday had seemed tall looked in the morning like gray columns disappearing into the white emptiness above. Jinhu walked carefully, not in a straight line, but in a zigzag, changing direction every 30 meters. An old habit. In the game, straight-line movement almost always attracted patrolling hunters. The first 200 meters were clear, then he heard water. A stream, not the one near the base, another one wider. It ran perpendicular to his route. Jinhu stopped at the bank. The water was clear, there was a current, the bottom was visible. Ankle deep. He crossed, marked the point on his mental map. On the other bank, the grass was flattened. He crouched. Tracks, 4 dents wide, round, without toes. This was not human. Something heavy, 4-legged, had passed here no more than an hour ago, while the grass had not yet risen. Jinhu knew what it was. In the game, they were called dark boars, large, aggressive in direct contact, but avoiding fire and noise. They did not attack first unless cornered or approached too closely. He did not personally test that assumption. He made a wide arc and continued on. 40 minutes later, he saw the camp. The camp was old, very old. 3 wooden structures, or more precisely, what remained of them. One had completely collapsed. The roof had fallen inward, the walls had spread apart. The second was holding only because it had leaned against a large tree, creating a slanted angle under which there was dry space. The third, the smallest, stood almost straight. A window without glass, the door knocked out, but the walls intact. Tall grass grew around it. Vines had taken over all 3 structures. The wood had long since taken what was its own. But there was something inside. Jinhu walked around the perimeter first, then looked into the window opening of the small structure. Nothing suspicious, empty. Then carefully entered through the knocked-out door, the smell of dampness and old wood. Underfoot, something crunched, rot, small branches. The left corner was overgrown with moss up to the ceiling. But by the right wall stood a table, crooked but intact. On it lay what interested him, a metal box, rectangular, rusty, with a latch. Jinhu opened it. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, 4 knives. Not kitchen knives, working ones, with wide blades and wrapped handles. Rusty around the edges, but the blades could still be restored. He carefully wrapped them back up and put them in the bag. Under the table, a canister, plastic with a cap. He shook it, empty, but airtight, for storing water or dry food. In the collapsed neighboring building, he found something else. 3 wooden sticks cut to the same length, clearly processed, possibly tool handles. A coil of thick wire, greened but flexible. Several iron brackets of different sizes. In the collapsed building, he found a real treasure under the debris. A metal bucket with a hole in the bottom, 2 large nails, a broken saw, half the blade remained, and the most valuable thing, a sharpening stone. Flat, gray, worn on one side. Jinhu held it in his hand and almost smiled. Now he could sharpen all the knives. Now he could sharpen the hatchet. Now the work would go faster. He wrapped everything in a blanket, tied it with a cord, and hoisted it onto his shoulder. He was already turning toward the exit when he noticed the last thing. On the wall of the small building, where the moss had not yet reached the boards, someone had scratched with a knife. Not decoratively, hastily, deeply. The letters were crooked but readable. "Do not go south at night, I siap mate." Jinhu looked at the inscription for a long time, then nodded to himself. "I already know," he said quietly. The way back took longer, the load was heavy, and he walked even more carefully. Several times he stopped and listened. Once he lay down behind the roots of a large tree because he heard the characteristic sound, clicking and hissing, which he was already beginning to recognize. He waited until it died down. He reached the base at noon, immediately started working on the knives. He fixed the sharpening stone in a crevice between 2 stones, so it would not slide. He worked evenly with pressure along the entire blade. The first knife took about 20 minutes. The result turned out quite decent, not surgical sharpness, but usable. He sharpened all 4 knives, then worked on the hatchet. The difference turned out to be enormous. With the sharpened blade, he cut down the next tree in 22 blows instead of 31. This was not a small thing. Every saved blow meant less fatigue, less noise, less time in the open space. Before dark, he managed to do 3 important things. First, he expanded the wall, added 4 more logs in height. Now the wall was almost 2.5 meters. He fastened the horizontal crossbars with iron brackets. He refreshed the burrs and added them to the top row. From the outside, the whole structure looked wild and crude. From the inside, reliable. Second, he made traps. The wire went into 3 loops, simple but working. He set them on 3 suitable trails around the base. 2 in the eastern direction, 1 from the north. Not combat traps, more like signal ones. If someone passed through, the loop would tighten, tied to a branch, creating a sound. Third, he made a water reserve. The canister from the camp held about 8 liters of water from the stream. He added purification tablets according to the instructions. 3 tablets for 8 liters, 30 minutes of waiting. Then he filled the thermos mug as well without purification for boiling over the fire. In the evening, he sat by the low fire, ate berries, washed them down with water, and thought, the second day was ending better than the first. The base was strengthened, resources replenished, tools sharpened. But this was only the beginning. Jin-Hoo understood well. Right now, he was at the level of the very first hour of the game. Basic survival. If this were a game, the status bar would show vulnerable in every direction. At night, the tribe drummed again, only now the sound was closer. The monster appeared at 3 in the morning. Jin-Hoo was not asleep. He lay under the blanket listening as the night sounds in the forest slowly faded. First one layer, then a second, then a third. When the birds fell completely silent, he sat up. This is a bad sign. Birds fell silent for 2 reasons, the tribe or something else. The drums were heard in the southeast, so not the tribe. So something else. He took the hatchet and stood on the inner side of the wall with his back to the rock. First silence, then sound. Not steps, not wind. Something between them. Heavy sliding along the ground as if something large and very quiet was moving, almost without touching the soil. The dry crack of a branch, once. Then pause, then sliding again. Jin-Hoo breathed evenly and slowly. The sound stopped by the wall. Very close, 1.5 meters, maybe less. Then he heard breathing. Not human, too slow and too deep. Like blacksmith's bellows, only organic. The inhale took about 3 seconds. The exhale the same. Then the smell. Rotten meat. Something wet and musky like an animal. And also sweetish, nauseating, like overripe fruit that had begun to decay. Jin-Hoo knew this smell. In the game, monsters had no smell, it was just an image on the screen. But the name, behavior, attachment to certain zones, he knew all of that well. It was a nightwalker. A large one. Not aggressive in the absence of direct contact. It oriented itself by heat and movement. Did not react to smells, only to heat signatures and vibration. Fire. Fire was its weakness. Jin-Hoo slowly, without making sudden movements, reached for the campfire coals. There were still several burning fragments there, small but alive. He carefully lifted one charred twig at the end of which a flame was barely smoldering. Then quietly took a second. The creature behind the wall did not move. It just stood there and breathed. Jin-Hoo waited 2 minutes, then carefully, very slowly moved toward the passage in the wall. The gap between the shutter and the log was wide enough to see outside. He looked. It stood 3 steps from the wall, tall, about 2 meters, hunched with long front limbs that touched the ground. Gray-brown skin, hairless, gleamed wetly in the moonlight. The head was disproportionately small for such a body, elongated. Eyes closed. It stood with its eyes closed and breathed. And somehow that was the most frightening thing of all. Jin-Hoo slowly stuck his hand with the burning twig into the gap. The flame was small, barely alive, but sufficient. The creature reacted immediately. It did not run away at once. First it turned its head slowly like a mechanism, then opened its eyes. Jin-Hoo saw them for a fraction of a second. White without pupils, glowing with a faint gray light. Then it stepped back. 1 step, 2, 3, and disappeared into the darkness as soundlessly as it had appeared. Jin-Hoo lowered his hand and leaned his back against the wall log. His heart was beating at double speed. He sat like that for a long time until the birds began to return. First one, then several. Then the normal night background restored itself. The creature had gone. Jin-Hoo slowly exhaled. So, fireworks, he said quietly. Then took out the notebook and, in the darkness by touch, wrote, Nightwalker. Reaction to fire, retreat. Does not attack without direct contact. Keep coals alive all night. Then closed the notebook and no longer tried to sleep. Jin-Hoo met the 3rd morning angry and determined. Angry because he had not slept. Determined because he understood. What he had built was good for 1 night. For long-term survival, something entirely different was needed. He made a list. Not in the notebook, just in his head, running it over and over. Immediately. External fire for the night. Permanent. That meant he needed a supply of firewood. That meant he needed a woodpile, a dry storage place. During the day, the 2nd level of the wall. Add sharpened stakes outside, not inward but outward at an angle. This is called abatis, an old military technique that Jin-Hoo knew from several books he had read on medieval fortification. Nothing complicated. Slanted sharp poles driven into the ground in front of the wall. Climbing over or running through them is impossible without slowing down. By evening, reconnaissance of the eastern direction. There, according to the map, there should be a small clearing with berry bushes and an old water source, cleaner than the stream. He started with firewood. In 2 hours, he chopped and stacked by the inner wall a supply for 3 nights. A dense pile of dry branches and 2 split logs. Splitting firewood without a normal splitting axe was torture, but the pole of the hatchet managed, especially if used like a wedge, driving it in with a stone. Then he started on the stakes. This turned out to be easier than building walls. Sharp poles were hewn quickly, 15 blows to sharpen the end, then drive it into the ground at an angle. He placed 12 stakes in 2 rows in a staggered pattern in front of the main wall. The result was an uneven, wild barrier, but a barrier. By noon, the base already looked completely different. A high wall, outer stakes, a narrow passage with a double shutter, a woodpile inside, 2 corner posts, simply elevations made of stones from which one could look over the wall. Jin-Hoo stood on one of them and inspected everything outside. "Good," he said, then thawed and added one more thing. He took a metal tray from the supplies and wire, tied the wire to the entrance shutter, stretched it along the inner side of the wall, and fixed the end of the tray above a small pile of stones. If someone opened the shutter from the outside, the tray would fall with a crash. A simple alarm, but working. The eastern reconnaissance brought exactly what he expected. The clearing was there. Small, about 20 meters in diameter, lit by the sun. A rarity in this forest. Along the edges stood low bushes, dark blue berries, the ones he had already eaten. There were many of them. Very many. Jin-Hoo gathered a whole handful, then another one. The source turned out not to be a spring, but a small stone basin into which water flowed down from a ledge. Clear, cold. The bottom covered with clean stone, no silt or mold. He filled both containers and felt something inside loosen a little. Water is almost everything. Without food, a person lives 3 weeks. Without water, 3 days. With a reliable water source, survival becomes an order of magnitude more realistic. On the way back, he set a trap for small game. In the game, it was a simple loop of cord, camouflaged with leaves, with bait inside, berries, or a piece of a bar. He did the same, spending 15 meters of the remaining cord on 2 loops by burrows he had noticed at the base of a large oak. 3 berries. Not much, but enough. Returned to the base. At sunset, when the light in the forest became orange and viscous, he lit the external fire, small, 1.5 meters in front of the wall, between the stakes. He deliberately left a narrow passage in the stake barrier to the fire so he could go out and add wood. Then he sat by the inner fire and ate. Berries, half a bar, water, not much, but alive. He wrote the result of the day in the notebook. Day 3. Base expanded, stakes installed, alarm on the entrance. Water reserve, 8 liters. Food, berries, 2 days of supply. Meat, none yet. Traps, 2 set. Nightlight, keep the external fire. Threat, Nightwalker confirmed. Saw 2 tribe members, distance 1.5 kilometers. Then closed the notebook and lay down to look at the ceiling. The drums began later than usual, almost at midnight. And this time there were several sources. 2 or 3 different rhythms intertwining. Jin-Hoo lay and listened. It could be a ritual, it could be communication, it could be a signal to move out. He could not know for sure, but he knew that the tribe was smart. In the game, they never attacked without scouting. And if they had already found the plane wreckage, it meant they already knew that someone new had appeared on the island. The only question was what they would do about it. The answer to that question came on the 4th day. At dawn, the trap caught a rabbit. Small, gray, already dead, the loop had worked cleanly. Jin-Hoo butchered it without pleasure, but methodically. He skewered the meat on a branch and hung it over the coals for a long time, so it would cook through. The first normal meat in 3 days. He ate slowly, chewed carefully, washed it down with water. While he ate, he noticed something. A bird on a branch 20 meters from the base, the very same bird he had noticed yesterday morning, in the same place. Small, mottled, ordinary. But it did not fly away. It sat and watched. Jin-Hoo lowered his gaze. The grass at the roots of the tree was slightly pressed down. Not a bird. Someone had stood behind that tree. He did not show that he had noticed, continued eating, looked toward the fire. Then slowly stood up as if about to go for firewood and turned his back to the tree. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught movement. A small, fast silhouette disappeared into the bushes. A child, or a very small adult. Jin-Hoo did not pursue. Instead, he did something else. Returned to the campfire coals, took the remaining piece of meat, which he had planned to leave for later, and placed it on a flat stone by the outer wall, outside, in plain view. Then he went inside and closed the shutter. Watching through the gap was inconvenient, but possible. He waited 20 minutes, then 30. At the 45th minute, the silhouette appeared again. The small figure was indeed a child, about 10 years old, no more. Dark skin, painted with simple stripes, short hair, no weapon visible. The child crept up to the stone, grabbed the meat, and instantly disappeared into the forest. Jinhu slowly exhaled. So they know, and they do not attack immediately, so there is still space. He took out the notebook and wrote, "Scout child, left meat, took it. Contact without conflict. Possibility, neutrality, carefully." Then thought and added, "or a trap, check tomorrow." On the fourth day, Jinhu decided to take a risk. Not a risk in the sense of drop everything and rush straight ahead. A risk in the sense of move farther from the base than the logic of initial survival allowed, because he was running out of one resource that could not be found near the base. Metal. The wire had run out. Only a few brackets remained. Of metal, he had only knives, a hatchet, and several items from the emergency kit. In the game, metal was obtained in two places: in old machinery wreckage scattered across the island, and in abandoned mines closer to the center. The mines were too early, but he knew the machinery wreckage. 1.5 kilometers west of the base, by the rocky cliff above the sea, lay the remains of an old helicopter. More precisely, what was left of it, a burned-out frame, partly crumbled, but still containing metal parts, bolts, wires, aluminum plates. He took all the knives, the hatchet, the cord, and went out early, barely after dawn. The path to the rock took longer than he had calculated. The forest in the west was denser. The trees grew so tightly that at times he had to squeeze through sideways. Underfoot it was slippery from moss. But then the forest suddenly parted, and he saw the sea. It hit him at once with color, space, smell. After several days in the forest, coming out to the cliff was like a blow to perception. Huge, sparkling in the morning sun. Waves crashed against the rocks below with a measured roar. Jinhu stopped at the edge and looked for a long time. There was no ship anywhere, no plane anywhere, no boat anywhere. Only the sea, the horizon, and the sky. He felt something, not panic, but close to it. The realization that until that moment, he had successfully kept at a distance. No one knows where he is. No one is looking. He is alone. Then he exhaled, turned his back to the sea, and went to look for the helicopter. The frame was found 100 meters from the cliff, in a lowland, partly hidden by overgrown ferns. It was already almost unrecognizable. The body had melted and deformed. It was clear that it had burned long and hard. The blades were gone. Part of the cockpit was open, either knocked out from the inside or burned out. But the structure held a heavy aluminum skeleton, bolted connections, wires, and metal braiding. Jinhu immediately got to work. He pulled out about 15 meters of wires of different gauges, removed 6 bolts from the frame, large ones with nuts, broke off 2 aluminum plates the size of a book, light but strong, found a small metal container with tools in the remains of the cockpit, a screwdriver, pliers, and adjustable wrench. Everything rusty but working. A special find was a lever from the door structure, long, about a meter, made of thick steel. Heavy but straight. It could become a lever, a weapon, and a digging tool. Jinhu hoisted everything onto his shoulder, then inspected the frame once more. In the far corner of the cockpit, under a layer of soot, he noticed something. A small compartment closed with a metal door. The door was held by one hinge. He pried it with the lever and it opened with a nasty creak. Inside was an emergency flare gun without cartridges. But the flare gun itself was intact, metal, heavy with a rotating cylinder. He took it, turned it in his hands. Without cartridges, it was just a heavy metal object. But Jinhu smiled because he remembered something important. He knew one place on the island where there should be cartridges for the flare gun. The way back was long and hard. The load pulled backward, his shoulder burned, his feet slipped on wet roots. Jinhu made frequent stops not because he wanted to, but because he understood. Falling with such a load on this terrain meant getting injured, and an injury here meant the end. Halfway there, he felt a gaze again. Not one, several. He stopped by a large tree and slowly looked around. Nothing visible, but the feeling was clear he was being watched. Not one person, 2 or 3, from different sides. He did not speed up, did not show concern, simply continued walking at the same pace. When the base appeared between the trees, he felt relief, brief but real. He made it, went inside, closed the shutter, laid out the finds, then sat and looked at them. Wires, bolts, plates, tools, lever, flare gun without cartridges. This was a different level of resources. With this, he could build not just a wooden wall, he could make normal fastenings, a reinforced door, metal spikes. He took the pliers and the lever and began. By evening, the entrance shutter received metal reinforcement. Along 2 horizontal logs, he screwed aluminum plates with bolts. Now it was not just a woven fence, it was a real door with weight and rigidity. Then he made a hook latch from wire that fixed the door from the inside. Outside was a warm sunset sky. Inside, a small base. Door, wall, stakes, woodpile, water reserve, tools. Jinhu stood by the door and once more inspected everything. "This is already home," he said quietly. Then grimaced. "No, this is still a shelter. Home will come later." He lit both fires, the inner and the outer. 8, wrote the day in the notebook. Day 4. Metal resources obtained, door reinforced. Flare gun without cartridges, need the southwestern bunker. Cartridges there. Surveillance confirmed 2 to 3 observers. Meat? Rabbit, tomorrow set 3 traps. Status? Stable. Then added one line. They are watching. So for now, they are not attacking. For now. On the morning of the 5th day, he found something by the outer wall. Not a threat. Not a trap. An offering. On the flat stone by the stakes lay 3 small objects. A fruit, round, dark red, unfamiliar. A small fish wrapped in a broad leaf. And something small, woven from grass, almost like an amulet. Jinhu stood in front of it and thought. In the game, the tribe had a trust system. If the player did not attack the hunters, sometimes gave them food or weapons. After some time, they stopped attacking, and sometimes left resources. But that was a game. Here, living people. Who had seen him for 4 days? Who had not attacked? Who had sent a child scout? Who had now left food? What did this mean? Neutrality? An attempt to establish contact? Or preparation for something else? He took the fruit and the fish. He left the woven amulet in place, then placed beside it a piece of meat from yesterday's trap, already cooked, cooled, and stepped away. An hour later he checked. The amulet remained. The meat had disappeared. Good, he said quietly, then added, or bad. Not clear yet. On the 5th day, he began the 2nd level of the base. Not because the first was insufficient, but because he understood well. A single-level structure has one fundamental flaw. It has no height. The one who stands higher always sees more and controls more. The rock ledge already gave him some height from the rear, but the frontal part was blind. He began with supports. 4 thick logs, the strongest of those he could cut, he dug in at the corners of the front part of the base. Deeply with tamping. Tied them in pairs with horizontal crossbars at a height of about 2 meters. This was the foundation. On top, a platform. Several logs of smaller diameter laid tightly together, with gaps only a finger wide. Wire fastening every 30 centimeters. Then railings made of branches, not beautiful, but they held. By the end of the day, he had an observation platform. Small, 1.5 meters by 2. But from it, the entire perimeter of the stakes, part of the trail to the stream, and the distant forest edge were visible. He climbed up and looked, immediately saw what he had not seen from below. Smoke. A thin, barely noticeable column about 500 meters to the southeast, where, according to the map, the secondary tribal camp was supposed to be. So they really were there. And they really were 500 meters away. It was both far and close. Far because they could have already attacked, but had not. Close because 500 meters is a distance an adult human can run in about a minute. Jinhu climbed down, lit the evening fire, and sat for a long time, looking into the flames. He was not thinking about tonight. He was thinking about the bunker. The night was quiet. The night walker did not appear. Perhaps the external fire worked as a constant deterrent. The tribe was silent. The forest lived its usual life. Jinhu lay on his back and thought aloud, slowly, quietly, so as not to disturb the balance of silence. A habit that had appeared on the 2nd day, talking to himself, helped structure thoughts. And honestly, simply helped not to go crazy from the silence. So he began quietly. Day 5, I am alive. The base stands, there is food, there is water, there are tools. Pause, what next? He looked at the stone ceiling. Next, the bunker. But the bunker is the center of the island. That means through tribe territory or around it. Around it means an extra 2 or 3 kilometers through bad forest. Through the territory is risky but shorter. Another pause. But for the bunker, a digging tool is needed. There is a lever, a shovel is needed. Or something like it. No shovel, he closed his eyes, can be made from wood. A wide flat blade, a handle. Not ideal, but it will be able to dig sand and loose soil. Make it in a day, but first, route reconnaissance. Cannot go blindly. Even if the map is in the head, need to check what really matches. One, he opened his eyes. The child, the offering. If this is an attempt at contact, it is the most important thing that has happened in 5 days. Because if he can come to terms with the tribe, or at least establish neutrality, it changes everything. It means his back is covered from one side. It means he can move farther. He was silent for a while longer, but to negotiate, language is needed, or at least gestures, or something common. He thought about this for a long time. In the game, they did not talk to the tribe. They simply attacked or did not, depending on the level of trust. But here they were living people, with a language, with a culture, with logic that could be understood if one observed enough. Tomorrow, he said, then closed his eyes and this time truly fell asleep deeply. In the morning, he placed not just food on the stone outside. He put one of the sharpened knives beside the piece of meat. Then he wrote in the notebook on a clean page, drew a simple picture, 2 silhouettes beside each other without weapons, an arrow from one to the other with a knife, the OK sign on the side, tore out the page, placed it under the knife so the wind would not carry it away, stepped back inside, closed the door, climbed onto the observation platform, waited. This time 2 came. Not a child, adults. One tall with a spear, the second shorter with no weapon in sight. They approached the stone carefully in circles, checking the perimeter. Then stopped in front of the offering, looked for a long time. The shorter one picked up the knife, turned it in his hands, then took the sheet, examined it, showed it to the tall one. The tall one said something. Jinhu heard the sound, but could not make it out. Then the shorter one did something unexpected. He took a small object from the bag on his belt and placed it on the stone in return. Then both left quickly without looking back. Jinhu climbed down from the observation platform, went out, and took the object. It was a tooth. Large animal, pierced and strung on a woven cord. A simple line was scratched on the tooth, wavy, like water. He held it in his hand for a long time, not knowing exactly what it meant, but feeling that something had just changed. On the 7th day, Jinhu went to the bunker. The wooden shovel was ready, crude, wide, made of dense wood with a sharpened lower edge covered with an aluminum plate. It was not convenient, but it dug. He plotted the route around the tribal camp to the east, through dense forest, skirting the gorge along the northern edge. An extra 1.5 kilometers, but without direct contact. He walked for 4 hours. The center of the island was different. The forest here was older, the trees thicker, denser, higher, the air more humid. Underfoot, a thick layer of leaves that had accumulated over the years. Walking was hard. His foot periodically sank ankle deep. He found the landmark without error. The old researchers' camp. 3 ruined structures made of wood and metal, partly consumed by the forest. Rusty constructions, empty boxes, fragments of some equipment, and beside it a hill. Small, overgrown with grass, ordinary in appearance, but Jinhu knew. Beneath it was not earth. He found the right place by the landmark. 3 trees in a triangle, the middle one with a broken top. Stood between them. Counted 5 steps north, stuck the shovel in. The soil gave way easily loose as if it had been dug up before. In 20 minutes, he was already half a meter down. In 40, 1 meter. The shovel struck metal. A hollow, deep sound. Jinhu straightened up. His hands were trembling, not from fear, from effort. He cleared the surface around it. A metal lid. Round, about 1 meter in diameter, with a handle, rusted but whole. 4 bolts around the perimeter. He took the adjustable wrench and began unscrewing. The first bolt gave way with difficulty, the second easier, the third very easily. The fourth had been welded or simply seized solid from time. Jinhu worked on it for 20 minutes until the metal gave way with a sharp crunch. He took hold of the handle and pulled. The lid opened. From inside came cold, dampness, and metal. The specific smell of closed spaces where there had been no air for many years. Below was darkness. He turned on the flashlight, the same one from the emergency kit, and directed the beam downward. A ladder, metal welded to the wall. 17 rungs, he counted. Below a corridor, narrow, concrete, going into darkness in both directions. Jinhu stood at the edge and looked down. His heart was beating hard. Not from fear, from anticipation. He knew what was down there. He had spent in total probably 30 hours in this bunker, studying, writing down, figuring out the mechanisms. But one thing was a monitor screen. And something completely different was a black rectangle in the ground, from which cold was pulling. "All right," he said quietly, and began to climb down. The rungs held. The metal had rusted on the outside, but the structure did not shake. He descended slowly, holding the flashlight in his left hand and leaning on the wall with his right. The corridor in both directions. The left one was short, ended at a door. The right one was long with branches. He went left first. The door opened unexpectedly easily, the hinges were lubricated, which in itself was strange. Who had lubricated them and when? Behind the door was a small room, 3 metal shelves, boxes on the shelves. Some open, some closed. He moved the flashlight around. The open boxes were empty, but the closed ones were not. The first closed box contained 4 briquettes. The first closed box contained 4 briquettes of pressed fuel, solid, similar to coal but denser. In the game, they were called technical coal and were used for smelting metal. Here, this meant one thing. It was possible to light a fire that burns long, steadily, and almost without smoke. Jinhu carefully placed the box by the wall. The second box was heavy. He opened it with effort. The latch had jammed and shone inside. Cartridges for the flare gun, 8 of them, red with metal bases in separate slots. He counted twice. 8. He closed his eyes for a second. 8 flare rounds meant 8 nights with guaranteed light. 8 situations where he could scare off either a monster or people. 8 signals that, if necessary, would be seen from a great distance. He put them into the bag with maximum care. The third box turned out to contain medicine. Some had gone bad. The plastic packages had burst. The contents had dried out or spread. But several items survived. 2 sealed syringe packs with antiseptic, a roll of gauze bandage in a tin can, a small glass bottle with a dark cap, iodine judging by the smell, and, unexpectedly, 2 tablets in a sealed blister. The inscription had worn off, but the shape and color suggested an antibiotic. Jinhu put them in a separate pocket. Antibiotics here were worth more than gold. The fourth box contained tools, a larger adjustable wrench, a hammer with a metal handle, 3 chisels, a fixed blade knife in a leather sheath, massive, clearly military, almost without rust, and a small hand drill. The last was especially valuable. With it, he could drill wood and stone, make proper fastenings. The fifth box was locked. The lock was a simple numeric one of the kind outdated models had in the 70s and 80s. 3 digits. Jinhu looked at it for several seconds. In the game, the combination was written on a scrap of paper under the third shelf. He bent down, shone the flashlight. The scrap of paper was there, faded, almost falling apart, but the digits were still readable. 417. He entered the code. The lock clicked. Inside were rolled up sheets. The paper was thick, waxed, almost untouched by time. He unrolled the first sheet. A map. Detailed, printed, with a coordinate grid and symbols. The entire island from above with points and numbers. Some of the markings were familiar to him from the game. Some were not. 3 red points he saw for the first time. He carefully folded the map and put it into the notebook between the pages. Then went into the right corridor. The right corridor was longer, about 30 meters. On both sides, every few meters, there were niches like storage rooms without doors. Most were empty, but in the fourth niche on the left, Jinhu discovered something that made him stop. A workbench, metal bolted to the wall. On it lay tools in perfect order, pliers, screwdrivers of different sizes, a small file, wire cutters, a coil of wire of different gauges. Everything lubricated, everything clean. Someone had been here recently. Jinhu immediately raised his head and swept the flashlight over the ceiling, walls, corners. Empty. But the air here was warmer than at the entrance. Not much by a degree or two, no more. But there was a difference. He stood and listened. Silence. Only a drop of water somewhere at the end of the corridor. Slow, measured. He did not rush. Slowly walked to the end of the corridor. There was another door. Heavy, metal, with a wheel-shaped locking wheel like on a submarine or a bomb shelter. Someone had applied fresh oil to the metal very recently. The trace is still wet. Behind this door was something. And someone regularly came here. Jinhu put his hand on the wheel, then removed his hand. Not now. Right now he was alone, without support, in an enclosed space. If there was someone or something behind the door, he would have no room to maneuver. This was the worst possible place to meet the unknown. He did what he considered right. Carefully made a small scratch on the wheel with the knife in a specific place. A mark. If the wheel is turned next time, it means someone entered or left. Then he turned around and went back to the exit. He climbed out of the bunker when the sun was already leaning west. For several seconds, he simply stood, breathing fresh air, then closed the bunker lid and buried it back, not completely, leaving only a light layer of loose earth for camouflage. If necessary, it could be opened in a few minutes. He distributed the loot among the bags so that the most valuable things were in the center, protected by soft items. He loaded the flare gun with 1 cartridge immediately, right there. Now it was ready for use. This feeling of a ready weapon in his hand changed something in his inner balance. He walked back already differently, not more cautiously and not more boldly, simply more confidently. Like a person who has a final argument if everything goes wrong. The way back took about 3 hours. It was already getting dark when he reached the base. The last half-kilometer he walked in twilight, almost by memory. Went in, closed the door, lit both fires, and only then sat down and caught his breath. He laid all the loot out in front of himself and, by the firelight, made a full list in the notebook. Read it twice. Then leaned back and looked at the ceiling of the ledge. "This is already another level," he said quietly. Because it was true. A week ago he had a small hatchet, an emergency kit, and 2 bars. Now he had a base with reinforced walls, an observation platform, a supply of water and firewood, metal tools, a military knife, a flare gun with cartridges, medicine, a detailed map with 3 unknown points, and, importantly, a still-living neutrality with the tribe. All this in 7 days. Jinhu smirked slightly in the darkness. A foreign world. A familiar map. It is possible to survive, he told himself, then added more quietly. Probably. The next morning, the 8th day, he worked on the map. Spread it out on a flat stone by the inner fire, pressed the corners down with smaller stones, and studied it for a long time, first comparing it with what he knew from the game, then paying attention to the discrepancies. Most of the map matched. The outline of the island exactly. Cliffs, gorge, shore, the locations of the tribal camps, the helicopter frame, the northern cave, everything in its place. But the 3 red points were new. The first on the northwestern shore in an area that in the game was simply hard-to-reach shore, marked as R1. The second in the southern part of the island by the isthmus. In the game, there were coastal caves there with useful resources. The point was marked as R2. The third, almost in the center of the island, north of the bunker. No game analog. Marked simply X. Beside each point, there was a small note, made by hand in different ink, in a different handwriting than the main map. Clearly added later. At R1, do not approach without preparation. At R2, water under the stone, 3rd level. At X, do not open before the time. Jinhu looked at the last note for a long time. Do not open before the time. This was not a warning from the creator of the map. It was a warning from the one who had come here after. From the one who entered the bunker. Who lubricated the locks. Who knew that someone else would be here. So he was not the first who had gotten to this island. And possibly not the only one who was here now. He folded the map and put it into the notebook, then sat by the fire for a long time thinking. In the game, he had never encountered another player. It was single-player mode. Here, another person was not in the script. But the marks on the map said otherwise. On the 9th day, he decided to go to the northern cave. Not to the red points, not yet time. First, he needed to secure the resource base. The northern cave in the game was a second shelter, farther from the tribal camp by the rocky shore. There were always deposits of natural stone suitable for building, sometimes random finds on the shore. The path took an hour and a half. The forest in the north was a little brighter. The trees thinned closer to the shore, letting in more light. The cave was there. Small, about 6 meters deep, 3 wide. Dry with a stone floor and a flat ceiling. No animal tracks, no human tracks. But on the shore beside it, there was something interesting. Wreckage, not a plane, something else. A wooden hull broken and half buried in sand. The mast fallen, rotten. Ropes decayed to threads. An old boat. Very old. The wood had blackened and was almost stone-like from time. But among the wreckage he found metal fastening parts. Rings, brackets, nails about 15 centimeters long. Large, forged, very strong. He gathered everything he could carry, then examined the cave more carefully. In the far corner, the floor went slightly lower. There a small pit had formed, filled with a layer of dry sand. An ideal place for storage, dry, cool, protected on 3 sides by stone. He marked this on his map. Northern cave, clean, dry, suitable for a second camp. Access to the shore, metal scrap from the boat, no signs of activity. Then added, reserve point in case of loss of the main base. Thinking about it was unpleasant, but necessary. He already understood, on this island, nothing is permanent. The tribe, monsters, the unknown person with the mark on the map, each of these factors could change the situation in an instant. Having a backup exit is not cowardice, it is strategy. On the 10th day, he began working with stone. Not because the wood had run out, there was plenty of it, but because wooden walls had one critical flaw. They burn. The tribe used fire, he knew this from the game, and now saw with his own eyes the traces of burned out sections of forest on one of the trails. If someone brought a torch to his walls at night, the end. Stone does not burn. He gathered material for 2 days, carrying it from the nearest scree slope north of the base. Flat, not too heavy, with relatively even edges. Each trip took about an hour there and back. He made 4 trips a day. On the third day, he had enough. He knew the masonry technique theoretically, both from the game and from several books he had read back at university during a practical course on architectural history. Dry masonry without mortar. Each stone is placed so that it overlaps the joints of the lower row. Offset is the most important thing. If the joints line up, the wall falls apart from one blow. If they are offset, it holds for years. He began with the lower row in front of the wooden wall. The work was slow. Each stone had to be tried in place, sometimes trimmed with the hammer and chisel, the next one selected so that there would be no large gaps. By evening, the first row was ready, the entire perimeter, about 8 meters. Low, ankle high, but a beginning had been made. The next day, the second row, above the knee. The day after, the third, waist high. The wooden wall now stood behind the stone one, like a second line of defense. Stakes in front of the stones. This gave 3 layers, wooden sharpened obstacles, a stone wall, a wooden wall. Jinwoo stood in front of his base and looked. It no longer looked like a temporary shelter. It looked like a small fortress. Rough, uneven, handmade, but a fortress. He felt something. Not pride, something quieter and deeper. Something like quiet, slow satisfaction from work that made sense. Then he sat on a stone by the entrance and ate. Berries, fried fish from the trap by the stream. A novelty of recent days when he had learned to weave a simple fence from branches that held back small fish and boiled water. Not much, but enough. On the 12th day, he heard a voice. Not tribal, they spoke in sharp clicks and short syllables. This voice was human in the full sense of the word. Male, low, and he was clearly not talking to himself. Jinwoo froze by the stream where he was filling water. The voice came from the east. About 100 meters away, no more. The words could not be made out, too far and too quiet, but the rhythm and tone were clearly conversational. Then a second voice, higher, possibly female. Jinwoo slowly lowered the canister into the stream, making no unnecessary movements. Then just as slowly stepped back to the nearest tree and stood behind it. The voices were getting closer. He considered the options quickly. First, hide and let them pass by. The safest. But then he would learn nothing. Second, retreat to the base immediately. Also safe. But they might come out onto the trail to the base. Third, look without revealing himself. He chose the third. He pressed himself against the tree, controlling his breathing. The voices became clearer. He made out the words Korean. Clean, without an accent. I don't understand why you don't want to go north. It's safer there. Safer? Did you see what happened by the northern stream 3 days ago? Tracks, but we don't know whose. I know whose. Someone lives there. And if someone lives there, either it is one of ours or it is a stranger. In both cases, we need to know. Pause, or leave it alone. We cannot leave it alone. If it is one of ours, we need help. If it is a stranger, we need to know. Jinwoo did not move. There were 2 of them. They were talking about tracks. His tracks by the northern stream. They knew about him. A second later, they stepped out onto the trail. The man was tall, thin, about 35 in appearance, in a torn jacket and with a homemade spear, short hair, stubble, tired eyes, a homemade fabric backpack over his shoulder. Beside him was a young woman, about 25, short hair in sweatpants and a jacket. A knife on her belt, in her hand a stick with a sharpened end. Both looked exhausted but not broken. They passed his tree 3 meters away. The man suddenly stopped, looked straight at the tree behind which Jinwoo stood. A long pause. "I know you're there," he said evenly. "I've been hearing you for 5 minutes." Jinwoo did not move. "We are not enemies," the man added. "If we wanted to, we would have already attacked." Jinwoo was silent for another second, then slowly stepped out from behind the tree. All 3 looked at one another. The silence was such that the stream could be heard flowing 20 meters away. The man relaxed his shoulders slightly. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 12 days, Jinwoo answered. "Alone?" "Alone." The man and the woman exchanged glances. Then the man said quietly and tiredly, "We have been here for 3 months. Their names were Pak Sonu and Lee Mijin. Pak was a former military engineer who had left service 5 years ago and had worked since then at a construction company. He was the one who knew how to hear the forest. Years of field service are not forgotten. Mijin was a medic, a young doctor who had been flying to an international conference. She barely spoke during the first conversation, she observed, assessed, kept her hand near the knife on her belt. They had fallen here differently. Not a plane, a cruise ferry. It entered a storm 700 kilometers from the nearest coast, and after that Pak and Mijin woke up on the shore of the island. They never saw any of the other passengers again. 3 months. Jinwoo listened silently while they spoke. They sat by his outer wall, not inside, just nearby, and talked. Cautiously at first. Then more and more openly, because the fatigue of loneliness, as it turned out, can be stronger than caution. "We have a base," Pak said. "To the southwest, small. We survived, but 3 months is a long time without proper equipment. We have almost no metal. We have no permanent source of fire, only flint. And no roof that properly holds back rain." He looked at Jinhoo's stone wall without emotion, but attentively. "You build well." "I had an advantage," Jinhoo answered. "What kind?" "I knew where to go," Pak frowned. "From where?" Jinhoo was silent, then decided to speak directly. There was no point in half-truths here. "I played a game. A similar island, similar conditions. I know the map. I know where the resources are. I know where the dangers are." Mijin spoke for the first time. "Are you serious?" "Yes, and did you find the bunker?" Jinhoo raised an eyebrow slightly. "You know about the bunker?" "We found it in the second month," Mijin said. "Couldn't open the lid, we had no tools. Only marked the place." "The red points on the map are yours," Jinhoo said quietly. Mijin and Pak exchanged glances. "You found the map," Pak said. "Yes." "And opened the bunker?" "Yes." Pak looked at him for a long time, then slowly nodded. "Then we need to talk seriously." The conversation took several hours. They sat by Jinhoo's inner fire. He let them inside after he understood. These people had spent 3 months here and had not broken. That said more than any words. Pak told things methodically like a military man, facts, dates, observations. In 3 months, they had mapped most of the island on a homemade map. They had discovered several important things that Jinhoo did not know from the game. First, there was not one tribe, but 2. The ones who lived to the southeast, Pak said, and others from the west. "They are at war with each other. We came under attack by the western ones in the 5th week, accidentally ended up between them. Barely got away." Jinhoo took out the notebook and began writing. "Second, the night monsters did not appear everywhere. They kept to 2 zones, the central forest and the southern shore. The northern part of the island was relatively safe at night. That explains why they did not go to the northern cave," Jinhoo thought aloud. "Exactly," Pak confirmed. "Third and most important, the island was not natural." "How so?" Jinhoo asked. "I am an engineer," Pak said. "I looked at the terrain. The western part of the island has too regular a structure for a natural formation. The rock layers run horizontally at an angle that does not happen with volcanic origin. That means someone changed the terrain. Long ago, but changed it." Jinhoo was silent. "So, this island was built. Or modified. For what, I do not know." "I know," Jinhoo said quietly. They both looked at him. He opened the notebook to the page with the map, found point X in the center of the island. In the game, this place was called the Source. It is not a metaphor. There was physically something there underground, deep. Something that explained why the island was exactly like this. Monsters, tribes, isolation. I never reached that point in the game. Too difficult, too late. But now, he raised his eyes. Now there are 3 of us. We have tools. We have a map. And we have knowledge that none of those who ended up here before us had. Mijin looked at him seriously. "Do you think there is a way out there?" Jinhoo answered honestly. "I do not know, but I think there is an answer there." Pause. The fire crackled. Outside, the drums began their nightly rhythm, distant, steady. Pak looked at the walls, at the woodpile, at the tools by the wall, at the flare gun in the corner. "One question," he said. "Yes, do you trust us?" Jinhoo thought for several seconds. "I do not trust you," he answered honestly. "Yet. But I think we have no choice except to work together. That is not the same as trust. But it works just as well." Pak was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Fair." Mijin nodded too. And at that moment, a familiar sound came from outside. Heavy sliding, slow breathing. The Night Walker had returned, only now there were 3 of them. And the external fire was burning brighter than before. Pak stood at the observation platform immediately, automatically, like a man who did not need tactics explained. Mijin said quietly, "What is that?" "Night Walker," Jinhoo answered. "Reacts to heat and movement. Afraid of open fire. You have already met it?" "Once. Retreated from a small fire, then we need more fire." She took 2 thick branches from the woodpile and handed one to Jinhoo. The 2 of them went out to the external fire and threw on wood. The fire flared higher. The sliding outside stopped. A long pause. Then the sound changed, moving away slowly. Pak above said quietly, "It's gone." Mijin exhaled. Jinhoo looked into the darkness beyond the stakes, then turned to both of them. "We now have 1 less problem," he said. 1 person by the fire could not control the fire and the entrance and the sound at the same time. 3 can. Pat climbed down from the observation platform. Are there many of them? These things? According to the map, several. They are not pack animals, loners. So fire is basic defense. Yes. Pack looked at the woodpile. Is there enough firewood? For 3 nights. Then chop more. I know how to chop. Mijin said, and I know how to make proper bandages and keep people from dying of infection. So let's agree, you build and chop. I watch the health. Jinhu looked at her. Agreed. They sat by the fire, the 3 of them. For the first time in 12 days, there were living people beside him. It felt strange, not bad, no, just strange. As if some internal tension filter had lowered slightly. Not disappeared, only lowered slightly. Jinhu opened the notebook. Then let's make a plan, he said. Not for today, for the next 2 weeks. Pack took a branch and poked the campfire coals. I'm listening. Mijin pulled her knees to her chest. Begin. And Jinhu began to speak. About Point X in the center of the island. About the 3 red points on the map. About the tribe from the east and the tribe from the west. About the second door in the bunker that no one had opened yet. About the island not being natural. And about the fact that somewhere here, either inside the island or at Point X, there was something that explained why all 3 of them had ended up exactly here. The fire burned. The island breathed around them. The drums fell silent only toward morning. The 3 of them went to the center of the island on the 20th day. Not earlier, Jinhu insisted. 2 weeks went into preparation, expanding the base, supplies of food and water for several days of absence, route reconnaissance. Pack walked it twice alone, memorizing the trail. Mijin gathered everything medical they had into one compact bag. The morning was clear. Jinhu stood at the entrance to the base and looked at it one last time before leaving. In 20 days, this place had changed beyond recognition. 3 layers of defense, an observation platform with proper railings, a woodpile for a week ahead, a water supply in canisters, traps on 3 trails, an alarm on the entrance. They had done it with their hands, a hatchet, wire, and stubbornness. Let's go, Pak said. Jinhu closed the door, slid the inner bolt from the outside through a special slot. Pak's design, simple and clever, and followed. The route to Point X took 4 hours. The center of the island received them with dense forest, wet earth, and silence that was different, not empty but saturated. As if the forest here listened more actively, Mijin walked silently. Pak periodically checked the homemade compass, a magnetized needle in water in a small container. Jinhu walked by memory. Point X turned out to be a lowland, a small depression in the terrain about 20 meters in diameter, overgrown with low grass. The trees around stood along the edges, not entering inside, as if deliberately leaving this place open. In the middle of the lowland was a stone. One. Large, gray, almost perfectly round, about 1 meter in diameter, protruding about 40 centimeters from the ground. No moss on it, no cracks. Perfectly smooth. Such stones do not exist in nature. Jinhu came closer and crouched beside it. He ran his palm over the surface. The stone was warm. Not from the sun, the sky was overcast. There was no sun. It was warm by itself from within. That is it, Jinhu said quietly. What does it mean? Mijin asked. In the game, this was the final point. The last place. There was a lever there. You had to find all the fragments across the island and bring them here. Then something happened. What happened? Pak asked. I do not know. I never reached that moment. Silence. Pak walked around the stone in a circle, examining it. There is no lever here, no mechanism. Just a stone. I see, Jinhu said. He looked at the warm surface and thought, in the game, everything was logical. Bring the items, activate the point, receive the answer. But this was not a game. There was no interface here, no hints, no markers. Here there was just a warm stone in the middle of a perfect circle of trees. Mijin suddenly said, wait. She took from her pocket the tooth on the cord, the very one the tribe had left by Jinhu's base on the 5th day. He had given it to her for safekeeping when they joined together. She had a neat bag for valuable items. The tooth was glowing slightly, not brightly, barely noticeable. A gray light like the one Jinhu had seen in the eyes of the Nightwalker. Did it always glow like that? Pak asked. No, Mijin said. Only now. Only here. Jinhu slowly stood up, looked at the tooth, looked at the stone. Put it on the stone, he said quietly. Are you sure? No, but put it. Mijin approached the stone and placed the tooth on the smooth surface. Nothing happened. 1 second, 2, 3. Then the ground beneath their feet trembled slightly, not strongly, almost imperceptibly like a distant truck, but it trembled, and the stone began to slowly sink downward. Not fall, lower itself evenly like a piston. Without grinding, without sound. Simply down into the ground, freeing the opening beneath it. Round, dark, with a ladder. All three were silent. They descended silently. Jinhu first with the flashlight, Pak second with the spear, Mijin last covering the rear. The ladder went deep, deeper than in the bunker. There were not 17 rungs. He counted to 50, then lost count, then stopped counting. Then the ladder ended. They stood in a space. Large. Very large, the flashlight did not reach the opposite wall. The ceiling was high, 7 or 8 meters. The floor was even, stone, polished to a mirror shine, and light. Not from their flashlight, its own, coming from the walls. The same gray, weak even, as if the stone glowed by itself. Is this natural? Mijin asked quietly. No, Pak answered. He approached the wall and ran his hand over it. Worked. Someone cut this stone with tools, long ago, but cut it. Jinhu walked forward slowly. Something stood in the center of the hall. He walked toward it until he made it out. A table? Or not a table, rather a pedestal. Stone, chest high, rectangular. On it lay objects. Several flat plates with scratched signs, a small metal box, and the most unexpected thing, an ordinary squared notebook. Battered, but intact. Jinhu took the notebook, opened it, first page, neat handwriting, Korean language. If you are reading this, it means you found the stone. It means the island chose you. My name is Choi Il. I was here first, or thought I was first. Then I realized there had been others before me. There will be more after me. The island is not accidental. It gathers people who know how to survive, think, and build. Why, I understood only in the 3rd year. Read on. Jinhu turned the page. He read standing quickly, skipping details and catching the main points. Choi Il spent 3 years on the island. He also found the bunker. He also established contact with the eastern tribe. The peaceful one, that very one. He studied the signs on the walls and understood them. On page 30 was the main thing. This island is a filter, not a prison. Not an experiment in the human understanding. A filter. It takes people from the outside world and checks whether they can build without destroying, survive without annihilating, think without fear. Those who pass leave, those who do not pass remain. I passed, I am leaving today. The stone under the pedestal is the last step, but only for the one who came here not alone. Jinhu slowly lowered the notebook, looked at Pak, at Mijin. Both of them were reading the last few lines over his shoulder. Not alone, Mijin repeated quietly. There are 3 of us, Pak said. Jinhu looked under the pedestal. There was another stone there, small, flat, with a hollow in the center, almost like a button. He did not press it immediately. He stood and thought. 20 days on the island, sleepless nights by the fire, heavy logs and aching shoulders, stone masonry, even and rough at the same time. Traps, knives, a hatchet with a dulled blade, which he sharpened again and again. An offering on the stone, a tooth on a cord, a stranger's notebook, and these 2 beside him whom he had not known a month ago, whom he did not trust, whom he now trusted, not completely, but enough. He thought about the island, about what had been here before him, about the night walker behind the wall, about the drums, about the child scout who took the meat and ran away, about how the sea looked from the cliff, huge, empty, real, about what he had felt here, not only fear, not only fatigue, something else. Jinhu, Pak said quietly. Yes, are you ready? Jinhu looked at the stone under the pedestal, then looked at the notebook in his hand, then said, wait. He put the notebook back on the pedestal, took out his own notebook, opened it to a clean page and wrote quickly, shortly, My name is Jinhu. I was here for 20 days. There were 3 of us. We built a base by the northern rock, keep the external fire going all night. The tribe from the east are not enemies if you do not attack first. The bunker, 17 rungs, combination 417. Good luck. Tore out the page, placed it beside Choi Il's notebook. For the next one. Then straightened up and looked at Pak and Mijin. Now I am ready. They stood side by side, all 3 at the pedestal. Jinhu placed his hand on the small stone with the hollow. Felt warmth, the same as from the large stone above. Living, strange, completely unlike stone warmth. Pressed. Nothing happened at once. 1 second, 2. Then the light in the walls began to change from gray to white, slowly, evenly, like dawn. The floor beneath their feet vibrated slightly, and Jinhu suddenly felt something. Not fear, not relief. Regret. Small, sharp, completely unexpected. Because this island with its forest, stream, stone wall, cord traps, and meat on the flat stone by the stakes had become familiar to him, almost his own, almost home. He thought about this for exactly 1 second. Then the light became blinding, and everything disappeared. He opened his eyes. Gray ceiling, the smell of disinfectant. A quiet, steady sound. Somewhere nearby an air conditioner was working. Hospital. He was lying on a bed with white sheets with an IV in his left hand, and the feeling that he had slept for several days in a row. Outside the window was a city, real with lights, cars, the distant hum of the street. Jin-Hoo lay and looked at the ceiling, then slowly raised his right hand. On his wrist was a trace, a thin scar where the skin had rubbed against rope several times. Calluses on his palms, a healed cut along his finger. Real, all the marks were real. There was a knock at the door. A nurse came in. "You're awake?" she asked calmly. "You were found on the shore 4 days ago. Unconscious, dehydrated. 2 others as well, a man and a woman. They are already in the neighboring wards. Are they alive?" Jin-Hoo asked immediately. "Alive. Everything is fine." She left, promising to call the doctor. Jin-Hoo remained alone, looked out the window at the city, thought about the island, about the stone masonry by the northern rock, about the warm stone in the center of the lowland, about Choi-il's notebook, about his own note left beside it, about the next one. Whoever he was, he would find the notebook. Find the note, and understand that he was not the first. Jin-Hoo slowly sat up in the bed, looked around. On the bedside table beside the bed lay his things. The broken phone, discharged. The cracked mechanical watch with the stopped hands, 1437. And one thing that should not have been there. The tooth on the woven cord, the very same one. With the wavy line scratched on its side, he took it in his hand, held it, put it back on the bedside table, stood by the window and looked for a long time at the city. Noisy, bright, overflowing with people who had never heard drums in the middle of the night and did not know what a woodpile for 3 days ahead was. He stood and thought about only one thing. Somewhere, right now, someone had woken up on the shore of the island, looking at the blue sky, moved his fingers, and began counting what he had.